Welcome everyone. This is Jim Chastain and welcome. Thank you for attending the Thursday webinar. Today, before I introduce the guest presenter on a topic that's generating a lot of interest, we'd like to run a couple poll questions to see where folks stand on the subject. And we very much appreciate your feedback and participation. So before we get too far into this, let me kind of ask the question, how often do you model your system in Revit? And as I say, there's no obligation to, the question is strictly just trying to get a perspective on where the audience interest is coming from and how to kind of direct the conversation. Leave this open for another 5 or 10 seconds. All right. And here's how folks weighed in on this. All right. And then the second question is, how often do you maintain a model in the modeling software, or the software for doing analysis? In this case, we're focusing on EasyPower, but it could apply to other, basically a mirrored system compared to your project. All right. Another 5 or 10 seconds on this. It looks like people are getting registered. Good. All right, and here's how folks have responded here. So it looks like we're all talking about the same thing, and I appreciate your attendance. And at this point, I'd like to hand the presentation over to Don Bachmiller, who's a BIM specialist for Schneider Electric. Don, the presentation is yours.
Thank you. Give me just a second here to make sure that, okay, are you seeing my screen?
Yes, it looks good.
I don't see anything telling me you are. Great, okay. Well, thank you. What I want to talk about today, based on a couple of things, the poll results, thank you all for your input there. It looks like the majority of our audience today doesn't even use Revit to model their systems, so it's actually good for the two topics that I want to cover. So what I want to talk about is, first off, why you would want to use a manufacturer's models, or the role of manufacturers in BIM, and the role that they can play within the industry as far as helping with electrical design and construction. And what that really boils down to is content. If you are going to model, if you're thinking about perhaps adopting the BIM workflow for doing your designs or construction, then the first thing that you're going to find is that you need content. That our models are all made up of, models of equipment, models of fixtures, and things like that. And so content is very important. And as a manufacturer, Schneider Electric, we recognize that we need to be able to provide quality content, and I'll explain quality content in a moment, but we need to be able to provide that and provide it in a way that doesn't hinder the efficiencies that you gain by adopting a BIM workflow. And then the second thing I'm going to talk about is utilizing the power of a tool like Revit to embed information into your models so that you're not just using it as the latest, greatest CAD tool, and it doesn't just become another way we draw things. Yes, now we're modeling things, but BIM is so much more than just 3D geometry and 3D representations of objects. There's a lot of data that can be embedded into your projects that can be very useful for things like analysis. And just and there's a myriad of uses for that data. However you want to consume it is possible, but you need to put it into the model in order for it to be used. And then the other thing too is that if you're going to adopt a BIM workflow and start participating in BIM projects, you really want the full benefit of BIM, which is, data, whether it be geometry or electrical data, that translates throughout the life cycle of the project, so that what we end up with is a realistic, virtual model of what's actually been built. So first off, I'll start with just the idea of content, and I'll paint a little bit of a picture here. This may be familiar to some of you, even if you're not doing Revit. Maybe it's for drawings or details or other types of things. But when you need a model from a manufacturer, the typical workflow is to go out onto the internet, and then you go to a manufacturer's website, and you start looking for where do they keep this information for me to consume. And so you have to spend some time finding out where they have things, and maybe it's your favorite manufacturer of light fixtures, so you already know where that stuff is. That's great, but you still have to go there, and then you search. You're looking for what it is you need. And so maybe as you're searching through this library, you're not finding exactly what you need, but you're finding something close. And so then you got to settle, if you will, for something that's not quite right, but it's close enough. Then you have to download it if it's available for download, and you're not even sure exactly what it is you may be getting. Is it native Revit geometry? Is it SketchUp that's been imported into Revit family? All that kind of stuff. And once you've got it, you download it. You might have to unzip it, and then you've got to load it into Revit so that you can put it into your project. Now that all sounds like kind of a convoluted, drawn out workflow. Really, that whole process could take just a matter of a few minutes if you know where you're looking and if you're able to find what you need quickly. And there's certain things that could happen where that could be a relatively painless process. Most of the people that I talk to, though, say, oh, they usually spend a half hour to an hour looking for what it is they actually need. And so we thought that it would be important that if we are going to offer our content, it has to be two things. It has to be quality content. By quality, I mean that it has to be modeled accurately and represent the real world products accurately, but it also has to be data rich and lightweight. So we don't want to develop these big, complicated models where the nameplates and the hinges and the levers and everything is modeled to where it bogs down your project. But we do need it to be an accurate representation of the real world item that it is. And then the other thing is we need to provide this content quickly. And so what we've developed is our application called Layout Fast. Now, Layout Fast works two different ways. There's a standalone version. I say standalone, it's basically just a website. And if you go to layoutfast.se.com, that's it. That's Layout Fast. And what this does is it displays all of the product lines that are available, not just for download, but for information. Okay, so for example, if we go to a transformer here, I can see product information. I can go to the products page and just list all of the transformers that we offer. You've got filters to filter out, so maybe I only want to see 30 kVA. And you can start to do just some data mining, if you will, of these products and figure out maybe you're trying to make a decision on what to use in your project. So you can add an item to the compare list, and maybe you want to add another item, and even a third, if you want, fourth, fifth, as many as you want to add, and then you can look at those items side by side. And so here you're comparing the two products, and if you want to hide what's the same about both of them, you can do that. Now you're seeing just the differences between the two. And so this product data, which is very readily accessible, can help you make a decision on what product you want. We also show pricing. This is all list pricing. So you can do some budgetary kind of estimation, if you will. Now, if I go back to basically just the product itself, we picked a transformer, and there's a configurator here on the left. So this is the difference between searching for what I want and telling it what I want, so that I don't have to dig through a bunch of stuff. If I know right off the bat that I want, a transformer, and I'm gonna give it a name and a kVA rating and a primary and secondary voltage, so I'm answering the criteria that I want for my product. And then what I get over here on the right is an actual model number. I get that cost information like I discussed. I get dimensional information right there. And I get, access to more in-depth data about that particular transformer. So I told it exactly what I wanted and got a product that matches that criteria. Now we could go to a different location, if you will, on the user interface. Perhaps this is at design development, and this is the amount of information I wanted to provide. But if I want to provide more information, I can move further along the project lifecycle to get really in depth with the data that I'm providing about this thing. Doesn't mean that if I provide very little data that I'm not getting a real product. As you saw, we definitely are. But this is just how much or how little I want to input in order to get something. So even very early on, at schematic design, where I don't necessarily know anything about the transformer, I just know I need a transformer, I can go to schematic design and just make a simple selection, say, give me a 45 kVA, and there we go. So I can get a real product without hardly any information applied almost instantly. Now, one of the things that I can do that's really cool about this standalone version is if I am not a Revit person, but I'm responsible for the outcome of the drawings, in the model being correct, is I can go in here. So I'm going to go back to a different product. Let's go to like a disconnect switch. And I can go ahead and configure a disconnect switch or any product, really. And after I've finished my configuration, so let's just say we want a 60 amp, in a type 3R enclosure. All right, so I've done all this. I've got a real product. This is all great. Nice to look at the data, but here's the key. I can click on this download button and say I want to download a Revit model of that disconnect that I configured, or I can download a two-dimensional, AutoCAD block of it. But the real power is here in the Revit download, because once I tell it I want to download that, it's going to go and create that RFA for me, the Revit file for me. The key to this to understand is that you may have a workflow where, again, the person with the engineering knowledge or whatever, the specifier who's picking the product, can go and apply their knowledge to get the right product, but then they can also generate a Revit version of that, and then email that to, or put it in the network job folder, wherever they want to place that item. I'm going to go ahead and put this on my desktop. So there it is. I've downloaded a Revit RFA of this configured product, and now I can send that to my modeler and say, put this in room 500, or wherever it's supposed to go. So that is the web version. There's more to it than that, and I'd be happy to share that some other time. But the basic idea is you can get product data, you can get cost data, and you can create a model of a product that you configured without ever touching Revit. Now, going into Revit, we also have a plugin for Layout Fast. So this is where if you are going to use it inside of Revit, you want to install the plugin. What we just saw a moment ago was just layoutfast.se.com. But if you want to be inside of Revit and do that same kind of functionality, you can install the plugin, and it works in Revit 2017, 18, 19, and 20. So we kind of match the Revit licensing scheme of being able to go three versions back. But basically when you install it, it's going to look at what versions of Revit you have, and it'll install itself and install the plugin into Revit. This is Revit 2020 that we're looking at right now. And it creates this tab in your user interface called Layout Fast. So the way this works is, this is my really fancy high-tech project here, and I don't have to be in a 3D view. I can be in a floor plan view or whatever. I'm just doing this in 3D to kind of show it's easier to look at this way for everyone. But the way this works is that the main tool you will use on this tab is the product selector. And when I click on that, you're going to see something that looks vaguely familiar, because basically what it does is it pops that web window up right here inside of Revit. Okay, so I don't have to leave Revit and go out to the internet. I just go, it's from within Revit, I can access this tool. There's some filter capabilities on the left here. All of these product lines are available, but if I'm only interested in certain ones, I can just filter out and say, you know, just show me panels and transformers if I just want to view those. So I'm not looking at that eye chart, if you will, of all those various options. So the key with content is, like I said before, it's got to be accurate and it's got to be data rich. Okay, so I could spend time looking up products and taking my generic versions of models and tweaking them, pushing them, pulling them, parametrically changing them to match something real. Or I could just go through this app and get something real, and you're going to see how quick that is. And so you don't have to maintain a library of content, because you can just get to it through Layout Fast anytime you need it. And you know that it's always accurate to what a real panel should be, or a real transformer, or a real you know, motor control center, whatever. So in this case, let's say I want to do a panel, and I'm going to do this based off of the schematic design level of detail, if you will. I shouldn't say that, because the level of detail is always the same. I'm getting, even though I'm making a very simple selection here, I'm getting a real product with real dimensional and information and data. Okay, so here's how quick the tool works. I pick the product I want and I hit insert. And then it says, okay, I'm going to create that model for you as configured, which we didn't do a whole lot to configure it other than telling it we wanted a 400 amp panel, and there's my panel. So just like that, I'm able to get a real world representation of this product versus throwing in a generic panel that may or may not fully represent something that could potentially be there. Now, because I chose this at the SD stage, you'll notice that it says that it's a placeholder. It's because I really didn't apply a lot of data to this thing. I just said, give me a panel so I could take up room in the space, so that the architects don't shrink, you know, my space too small, or so that I have enough room to get other equipment in or whatever. So right now it's just acting as a placeholder. As I progress further in the project, if I want to update this, here's another nice feature, is that I don't have to go find something new and then replace this item with the new thing. You have the ability, because this was put in through Layout Fast, is to click on that, go to Layout Fast and say, I want to modify that item. So we go to the Modify Family tool, and it's going to pop open the app, and it's going to bring us to that configuration. So even if I started this at the CD stage and I want to go to FM, or if I want to change something, it'll bring up that configuration. So here, we started here at SD. So if I do something as simple as, let's go to DD, and we'll just start to make this more accurate to, or more appropriate for our project. So I'm going to give it a name. It's going to be a 480 volt panel. We started with the 400 amp. I'm going to change it to a 600 amp. It's a main circuit breaker, certain amount of space for the breakers, in a type 1 enclosure that is surface mounted with a door. So I just went in, configured the product exactly how I want it, all new information on the right there, but then all I have to do is hit update. And so now, instead of going and finding something new, taking out the old one, replacing it with the new one, I just update this panel, and now it's reconfigured it. I don't know if you notice it, but it's a bit wider. and it's got a name now because it knows what it is, because I've provided enough information for it to be more than just a placeholder. So I'm going to repeat that a couple more times really quickly, because that's going to take me into my next topic of putting intelligence into our project. So I'm going to get myself a transformer like we saw earlier, and I will configure that as well. So this is going to be transformer A. Let's just say we need a 45 kVA. I'm guessing at all these numbers because I don't really have a real design working here, but I do have a real product. I can click insert just like we did with the panel a moment ago, and I can drop this transformer into my project. So there's that. And then one more time, just very quickly, I'll do a branch panel. So I have enough to where I can start to build my distribution system and start creating some circuits. So in this case, I will go with I'll go with an NQ panel, a lighting panel board or a branch panel board, whatever you want to call it. It's going to be panel A. Let's say this is a 208 main lug. It's right there. Maybe I need a 225 amp panel with aluminum bus. I want to do 42 poles, and I want this to be flush mounted in a type 1 enclosure. So again, I fill out my criteria, I get my actual product, I click insert, and place it into the model. So there we go. We've got a panel, main distribution panel, a transformer, and then our branch panel. Okay, so you can see how very easily I can drop stuff in as I need it, and I can change it as I need it. Now, I want to take a step back and talk about the fact that, hey, we made something outside of Revit. How do I get that in there? Well, once you create it, then it's just a matter of doing Revit as usual. So I'd say I want to load that family from my desktop. This is one I did earlier, did it outside of Revit, but I load that in, and then I'm able to place that item into my project. And what's really cool is, even though I did this outside of Revit for this disconnect switch, I could click on it and go to modify family, and it will actually go to the configuration that was done for this disconnect, and then I could change it. So once we get it in there, we have control over it from inside of Revit to make any updates that we might need to make. So anyway, just wanted to point that out, that and that's basically it. And any of those products that you saw on the app, it's that easy to put them in. You go in, you configure it, you say insert, and it's in. Now, I said something earlier about this idea that using Revit or BIM as kind of just the next CAD, and really how it can be quite beneficial to input data into our models as well. Now we see there's a lot of data within these products built into them. So if we go to LabFast, we can always get access to the data sheet directly from the model. And there's a lot of data, a lot of information here, and that's great. But there's also some functional data, functional information, if you will, and Revit does a pretty good job electrically of being able to manage that. There's enough there to at least apply it to for analysis and things like that. So one of the things that I find when I talk to people, and as I've been doing this for years and years, is that most people have gotten to where, okay, I'm modeling with Revit. I may even be using manufacturer's content with Revit, but that's all I really do. And then I do all my circuiting and everything else. I just do that kind of, through Excel, and I manage that all, somewhere else. So I just want to show how easy it is and simple it can be to do that directly within the model. And then maybe some of the benefits of showing why you might want to do that. So the first thing to doing this for circuiting is to establish your distribution systems. So if you go to your MEP settings, your electrical settings, we see that we have certain voltages defined. And that just basically says that we have a voltage called 480, and what it means is that it's 480 volts, but it has a range of 460 to 490. So you can define any voltages you need. And then with those voltages, what you can do is you can build distribution systems. And so you can say, all right, I want a 120/208 system that's a 3-phase Y configuration. The line to line is 208 and the line to ground is 120. And so you could start to create, any unique types of distribution systems that you need. Once you have those established in your project, then they're available for use by your model components. So if we click on this panel, we see that it's a 208 volt 3-phase panel. Okay, so if I click up here for the distribution system, I see that that fits into one of my distribution systems that I have defined in the project. And I need to make that association if I'm going to be able to circuit items to that. Okay, same thing for the transformer. Now the transformers are always a little different because up here is where you define the primary voltage, but then you do have to go into its properties in the properties palette and set what the secondary voltage is. Okay, and then finally with this panel, I'll do the same thing. Now that's a 483-phase panel, so that's the distribution system that I have in my project that's available that matches that. And all of these are all these properties that the panel knows that it's 483-phase. That's all built into the electrical connector within the object itself. So you may have situations where you get content from a manufacturer and they didn't bother with an electrical connector. Well, now you can't circuit anything to that item or circuit that item to anything else. Or maybe they put in a connector because it's a good idea, but then they never really defined it. So those are just some things to look out for. So now that I have that established, I can now start to build my connectivity. And so I'll start downstream and I'll say, all right, this panel, I'm going to create a feeder for it or a circuit for it. So I just click there and say, all right, where is that being fed from? And I can do it graphically. I could say I want to select a panel and then click on this transformer because I want the secondary side of the transformer is what's feeding that panel. Okay, so I just click on that transformer and now I've created that relationship. How do I know? Because if I click on this panel and I come up here to electrical circuits, I see that it's connected to the transformer. Okay, so now I need to connect the transformer to something. So if I click on that, I can create a power circuit. And in this case, I can use the pull down to pick from the list. Okay, so the disconnect switch that I put in was a 480 volt disconnect. So that's why it's showing up as something I could potentially connect to. But I want to just connect right to that panel. So I'm going to choose that the main distribution panel is feeding this transformer. And then finally, we have the panel, its main distribution panel itself. Now, where is this going to? Well, it could go to another piece of equipment like a switchboard or something, or it could go out to the utility transformer or whatever. It all just depends how far down upstream I want to take this, how far I model. Okay, it is always a good idea to create a power circuit for it, even though you don't apply a panel or a feeder to it, because then you can get properties of the circuit itself, and you can start to manipulate those as needed. So now what we have is we have a panel feeding a transformer, which feeds another panel. It's a typical system, right? And we can see what's going on by creating a panel schedule for these items. And so I'll create a panel schedule for the MDP, and I'll just use the default. This is what the panel schedule looks like in Revit. A lot of people are very put out by it and don't like it and don't want to use it. That's fine. You can customize how this looks. There's a lot of capabilities to make this look more like you would like it to. But the point for this demonstration that I want to make is simply that I've created a schedule and I see that it is picking up the load from the transformer. Now, by default, it's going to put a 20 amp breaker in. I can go into the properties of the circuit and say, no, that needs to be 60 amp or however big that needs to be, okay? And then you have the freedom to kind of do things like, all right, I can move this load down, move it over, put it wherever I want to put it, all right? So the key here is that I'm getting the connectivity of what's going on. Now, it's not much to look at right now because there's nothing connected, so everything's basically zero. Same thing for this panel. I go in and create a panel schedule for my branch panel, and there I see listed nothing's connected to it at this point, okay? So how do we start doing that? Well, it's the same process we connected the equipment. We can do that with our devices and so forth. I'm going to actually switch over to a floor plan view. This will be a little bit easier to make these selections. So here we see the power plan. I see my panel, transformer panel. I see my receptacles. I've got a motor over here in the corner of this room. And so I want to start circuiting this stuff up. So it's the same process. You select a device, create a power circuit. Now, by default, it's trying to connect it to the transformer. I don't want to do that, but I do want to connect it to panel A. So I'm going to change that to panel A, okay? And it automatically puts it in the first available circuit, but we're going to shift these around as needed later. If I want to show the home runs, right now here it's just indicating the home run, but I could say, no, put an arced wire on there to show the actual home run for that, okay? And then I could even tag that to say, okay, that's going to, you know, panel LA circuit 1, okay? So if you want to do multiple items, you can select multiple items and then say create a circuit. So it's showing, again, it's just kind of showing you the connectivity of it, and it put it in panel A. So I'm good there, but maybe I just want to show the home run here and show, you know, circuit numbers next to these. However you choose to do it, that's fine. And another way to do it, maybe as your design is changing and things are being added, is let's say I create a circuit for this particular receptacle, okay? But then later on, I added these two receptacles and I want them to be on that same circuit. Well, you always have the ability to go into a device, click on the circuit and edit that circuit. And then here, using the add tool, I'm gonna add this receptacle and that receptacle, and I'm gonna finish editing the circuit. So let's pause here for a second and we'll go back to our panel schedule for the branch panel. So if I click on that panel, now I see that those receptacles have been added, okay? And I'm seeing a load based on what's connected. In this particular one, I've got one receptacle, it's a quad, so it's showing 360, whereas the other ones are 3 receptacles, so it's showing 540. And you might say, well, okay, this is all great, but why would I want to do this? Well, it's really nice because if you start to make changes, so let's say, oh, all right, this receptacle is going away. They put a door here, an opening here, and we don't need that receptacle. I don't have to change anything else. I can go back to my panel schedule, and now I see that that load has been updated for that particular circuit. So it's not, you know, trying to coordinate what's going on in Excel versus what's going on the drawings. We can just keep track of what's happening in one place. And that's really the power of Revit and parametric modeling. So here's an example of like this motor. Okay, this happens to be a 480 volt motor. So I create a power circuit and it's going to go to the main distribution panel. And you know, maybe I do want to show a home run for that and tag it as well. So it's putting it in that 3-pole circuit. Oops, I keep doing that, sorry. So I can do the same thing with my lighting. Now here I've already wired up all the lighting. So in this case, I can just grab these light fixtures and then say, okay, they're gonna go to panel MDP. These are 277 volt lights, so they match up with that panel. That's why I put it up there automatically. And you notice that by doing that, now all of a sudden I've got all my wiring showing up and it's already been tagged. Do the same thing with these light fixtures here, create a circuit for them. And it's simply as, you know, it's as simple as just clicking a button and then there we go. So I want you to note that it put these on circuit 7 and these on circuit 9. Well, this goes in both directions. So if I go into the panel and I go to edit the schedule and let's say, well, I need some spaces in between there. I want to move this down from circuit 9 down to circuit 21, okay? And so if I've done that, then my drawing's updated. My tag is reading where that circuit location is. So I hope you're seeing here that there's just from a managing the data and the information, what's happening in different places, only really needs to be managed in one spot. Whether you change it on the drawings or if you change it in the schedule, you're always up to date, both with the loads that occur as well as with the locations, the circuit numbers, and things like that. So, for example, going back to this pump, let's say I've got this pump in here and I got it from, this is a generic one that comes with Revit, but maybe I got it from a manufacturer, I got a cut sheet on it and it says what the load's supposed to be, and I should be able to change that somewhere. So most likely it's a type property. And so here I'm seeing it's a 460 volt, they said, but good thing our range is 460 to 490. But there we see too, we can change the apparent load. So maybe I'm looking and I've determined that, you know, the load on this is really going to be 1800 instead of 1567. Or I looked in the, you know, in the code book and saw what the typical load is for that type of item, and that's the value I want to apply. So then I will see that in my panel, again, we've got that, and this is distributed across 3 phases, but we've got that value updated. So I'm not having to, oh, I changed it on the drawing or I changed it in the schedule, now I got to go to the other place and do the same thing. We don't have to do any of that, depending on how this is set up. But there's a real benefit to this, I believe, in that you're managing all that in one place instead of jumping around from one application to the next. And then lastly, what I'll say before I leave some time for questions here is simply, because I've taken the time to put this information into my model, now other objects, other products, if you will, can consume that data. And so I can export this now into something like, oh, I don't know, EasyPower. And because it knows the connectivity of all my systems, it should be able to analyze those with very minimal, you know, tweaking, if you will, inside of EasyPower. And what we would ultimately love is that direct, you know, this is the model I created, dump it in there, because X is connected to Y is connected to Z, and all the information's there, all you got to do is analyze it. Now, of course, there is some tweaking and different things you have to do once you go into a different software application, but the idea here is as much data, accurate, correct data that you can provide from your model is less that you have to input manually when you're doing other tasks. So there was one other thing I wanted to show that, oh no, I already did it. Never mind. I was going to talk about bringing in something from outside that was created from outside of Revit. So that disconnect switch, as you saw there. So that's just kind of the basics of creating circuits and really, you know, building distribution systems within your models in order to become more efficient, to keep better track of your data, and then also use your data for any type of analysis that you might want to do. And I hope that what you've seen here in the first half of what I showed is that, you know, when it comes to getting accurate data, you want to get it quickly and you want it to be correct and to be easily modifiable. And so that's the solution that we have provided with Layout Fast. So with that, Jim, I know I'm a little bit early, but that leaves us plenty of time for questions. So just guess we can open it up to questions.
Okay. So the first question that came in was basically someone checked the website. They said that Layout Fast indicates it's only compatible up to Revit 2018. Is that just a...
No, well, if you look at the marketing piece on there, I mean, here, this is Revit, you can see at the top of my screen, I'm in Revit 2020 and I've used it. So we just haven't updated our marketing piece.
I figured that was what you needed. And so you've showed the request came in. What does the 2D plan look like after you've configured the families? And it seems like you did that.
Yeah, it's just there's like in this case, there's the panel and the transformer, and I'm in a medium level of detail. If I go to fine, it doesn't really look any different. If I go to coarse, it doesn't really look any different, except you're not seeing the nameplate and the logo. But I will say this, once you bring these items into Revit, you can modify them any way you choose. So if I wanted to put some kind of hatch pattern over top of this to indicate that it's a 480 volt panel versus a 208, all I'd have to do is go and edit the family and do a little bit of family work in there to make that happen. And I'm saying all that to say we can't really lock these things down. They're at your disposal. You know, they have some capabilities of being modified. You can draw a conduit from the faces of them. You can add gutters. For this particular product, if I go in here and I say, oh, it needs a 9-inch gutter on the left, I can just go in. We've made some parameters that make it easier to modify these things versus just going in and editing the length, width, and height of it. You can, like, for example, you might look at this and go, that's great, but I don't want to show your logo because I don't want to, you know, have it on there. So you just go in and say, all right, don't show me a logo, and we're fine. So there is some capability of changing these things, but back to the original thing, yeah, they look like that in plan view.
And you actually just demonstrated the answer to the next question. Can you update panels after you've circuited devices to the panel?
Yes, you can. I think the question there is more along the lines of, could I go into this now and go to the modify and make changes to it? Now, keep in mind, it's a 480 volt 3-phase panel. So there's two things that I cannot do. I cannot change it to a different voltage or distribution system because nothing will be able to be circuited to it at that point. And I can also not, what was I gonna say? Oh, so this happens to be an I-line panel. That's the product line. I cannot say, oh, I want to go with an NF panel instead. You couldn't just go in, hit modify family and pick a different product. So it's got to stay within the product line. But like you saw, I can make changes to, I could change the number of poles, I could change, or number of circuits, I should say. I could change, you know, the mounting from a surface mounted to a flush mounted. All that kind of stuff can be changed, even though there's items circuited to it. It's just I can't mess with the distribution system.
And George has a question. Is it possible to save custom parameters in the Layout Fast tool?
George, I'm so glad that you asked that question because that's one of the newer features that we've added somewhat recently. So if you notice here on the Layout Fast tab, there is some different tools than just the 3 that I focused on. One being the shared parameters tool. And so what you can do is when you click on that, you've got 2 ways you can do this. So you can go in and you can find your shared parameters file. You know, you just go to wherever you're keeping that, right? And then hit open and it'll list out all your shared parameters that are in that file. And then you check the ones that you want, and then you can check this box here that says apply selected parameters when inserting products. So what that means is whenever I bring something in from Layout Fast, it's going to add these 3 parameters. Now you need to be careful because if you notice my shared parameters file is set up for light fixtures and electrical stuff and devices and transformers and equipment, you know, it's got a myriad of things. Now I've said to the tool, apply these 3 parameters to everything that I bring in. So what I end up with is a panel that has these 3 parameters in it, which doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So there's a way around that. There's a couple of ways around it. The first is just break out your shared parameters into product-specific items. So have one for transformers, one for panels, one for light fixture, however you do that. But then also you do have the option of simply just going in and saying, all right, look, I've got your panel now, your Square D panel. I'm going to edit that, go to Layout Fast, go to the shared parameters tool, and then just apply the specific parameters that I want and hit this apply parameters button. Then when I save this, every time I use Layout Fast, it's going to use this as the base model. And so every time I use Layout Fast, it'll have my parameters in it. So that's a long-winded answer to say yes, it is possible.
A question from Ben. He wants to know if you could do a quick demo with an MCC, Motor Control Center.
I sure can. So let's say here's a pad over here in this room and I need to put some equipment on there. Now, and I'm glad you brought that up too, because I can explain a little bit more about things like lineup equipment. So the first thing I'll say is that when you see this list here, or this grouping of products, what you see is what you get. So if you don't see what you're looking for in this list, we don't have it through this system. Doesn't mean we can't make it if it, like a double-ended unit substation or something like that. But if you notice, I don't have any liquid-filled medium voltage transformers. We do have the cast coil and the power cast and the dry type medium voltage. Almost everything here is low voltage. But we do have things like switchgear and switchboards and motor control centers. So if I go to the motor control center, now the difference between doing a lineup versus a single item is that when you do your configuration over here, you're configuring the system, not necessarily the product itself. So this is going to be motor control center 1, and let's say it's a 480 volt system. Again, I pick whatever in a type 1 enclosure, and it's fed from the top. Okay. Now, down here are my choices for sections, which with motor control centers, it's basically just one section. Okay. But let's say it's got 3 of them. Okay. So I click that 3 times to add 3 sections. Now it's wanting more information about each one of these sections. So if I click on that first one, it says, okay, what's going on inside that section? Now I'm not defining bucket 1 has this and bucket 2 has that, but I'm just kind of defining the basic gist of what this section is for. So maybe this is for, this is my main circuit breaker section. And then in here, this one's going to be, I don't know, starters that go from 1 to 25 horsepower. And then this section here is going to be maybe, VFDs. Okay, so I'm just giving it a general idea of what's happening. I'm not defining what's going on specifically internally. I click insert, and it says go ahead and put it in your model. I'll just drop it right there, and I think it's going to be rotated wonky, so I'll have to probably rotate it. But what it basically does is it says, all right, I configured all 3 sections of your motor control center, and there it is. And like I said before, it's not oriented properly, but actually it is oriented properly to my 3D view, but there we go. So there's my motor control center. And then now the same thing is true for things like switchboards or switchgears, but you get different types of sections with those. You get, this could be an incoming section, a main breaker, a double row section, a single row section, whatever. And like I said as well, you always have the freedom to manipulate these after the fact. So if you have some cut sheet information or whatever that says if you've got a certain type of VFD in here, this box needs to be wider than it currently is, you always have the option to go in and edit the dimensions. So you could say, oh, well, according to my other drawing, the width of that 3rd section is supposed to be that. And so you go in and you change it. Actually, I changed all 3 of them because all 3 of them are the same thing. But I could have created a new type and made that one wider. And I buggered this all up, but you get the idea.
Next question. Can I interrupt you?
Please do.
Can you change units in the panel schedule from VA to watts?
VA to watts. So that is determined by the template of the schedule itself. So if I want, right now that's showing in VA. And the way you do that is if you go into, and kind of move some things around here with 2020, but if I want to edit a template, then, I'm just using the default one, so that's the one I'm going to edit. And then here's where that value is coming from, and it's telling me that the parameter that it's using, I can go in, use a different parameter that maybe reads in amps or watts or whatever. And I can also say, all right, so what do I want this to read in? If I'm fine with the parameter, actually that one I can't change. But if I'm fine with the parameter, I just want to use a different thing like watts, then I'll say okay, and now it's going to be using that. I finish my template, go here, edit that panel schedule, and it's still showing in VI. I think what I'd have to do then is get rid of that panel schedule and create a new one now that I've made that change. But yes, you can there's a lot of freedom in doing those kinds of things, customizing it how you would want it to look. So there we go, now it's in watts.
So the next question comes from Mexico, an engineer in Mexico. The question is, how compatible are the Schneider products and Layout Fast according to the Mexican Schneider products list?
That is a good question. I am going to pop this back up to just kind of show what we're doing with that. So what we're doing with that is that when you go to layoutfast.ic.com, or if you use the plugin the first time, you have to create a profile. And part of what you do in your profile is you answer the question of what countries you're doing business in. And so notice I have United States, Canada, and Mexico, but all the countries are listed here. But I will tell you, full disclosure, not all of these have been populated with the products yet. So if you're trying to do work in Bangladesh and there's certain criteria that defines, like if these are IEC rated versus UL listed NEC stuff, then there won't be anything in there. So the reason for that is that we're trying to get you the right products based on where you are. So going back to the products page, if I'm in the US here, so I'm on the US. If I go to Canada, for example, you see that change. So we've developed some of our Canadian type products. And so now there's different products that weren't here just a second ago, like this low voltage transformer is a different kind. And we have these meter center stacks, or this, where is it? This MDS here. And so the products will change depending on what region you're in. So as far as answering the question about Mexico, if I click on that, right now I believe it's just showing products that can be used in the US or Mexico. I don't have any specific products listed that are, unique to Mexico. So if you do have a product that's really just for Mexico, eventually we'll get those in there, but that feature is just something we're just now developing.
Next
where
question.
We'll have, I'm sorry, we have, we're a global company. And so at some point in the future, we will have all of our products, but that may be, a bit of a daunting task, but we'll get there eventually.
Does AutoCAD MEP work with Layout Fast?
The only thing we do with AutoCAD, if you saw it when I first started doing that download option, is you get 2-dimensional blocks. The reason for that is that our friends at Autodesk did not give us the ability to control the Z dimension parametrically. We can make things parametric in the X and the Y dimension, but not in the Z dimension. And so unless all of our products were all the same height, we can do it, because the only other option would be to make what's called a multi-view block, to where we had all the different height options built into the one single block. And even just partially testing that, the file size got so ridiculously huge that we didn't think it was worth it. So unfortunately, if you're going to do this in AutoCAD and you generate Layout Fast products, they're going to be just 2-dimensional.
Okay, does Layout Fast have ATSs? Can it be connected to both normal and EM supplies?
Yes and yes. So we purchased ASCO in 2018, and we are slowly in the process of offering their line of automatic transfer switches into Revit, so you can configure them, and whatever you want to connect them to, that's up to you. So if you've got equipment in your project that matches the distribution system of the transfer switch, whether it's emergency or normal, you can just connect it up to it.
Can equipment be tagged in plan view?
Yes, that's just a Revit question, really. You can make tags to read whatever properties you want. So I've got a tag that reads the panel name of my equipment, and as I tag things, it will show them. So there they are in plan view. You can even tag them in 3D view if you wanted to. You notice with our equipment that it already has the name on it, so you may not need to do that in 3D.
Here's a cute one. John says, it looks like the light fixtures are on the floor. Can you do recessed floor receptacles?
Well, first of all, the light fixtures are not on the floor. It just depends how we look at it. That's the thing about Revit. Now here, yeah, it looks like they're on the floor because this is in plan view. Can we do recessed floor receptacles? I'm sure you could. Just like this particular receptacle, this is the one that I created for my use in my projects. And it's what's known as face hosted. So if I want to create one of those receptacles and I want to put it somewhere, it's looking for a 3-dimensional face to attach to. Now in this case, the floor is a 3-dimensional face, so I can click, and now I've got my receptacle in the floor there.
Nice.
It's kind of hard to see.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's just basic Revit functionality.
Jeremy wants to know if you can have clearances show up in the model.
Absolutely. So I didn't show that just for the ease of not having to look at it, but all of our equipment has a subcategory called clearance area. When we turn those on, there we see equipment clearances above the panel, in front of the panel, below the panel, in front of the transformer, behind the transformer, and you do have the freedom to modify these as needed. So if you click on, let's say, this panel and you go over here, there's some properties. I think I passed them up. Well, hang on. There we go. So if I want to maybe take the clearance out front a lot farther, I can change that dimension and stretch that out. The clearance above the panel, maybe I want it shorter, so I can do that. And then I also have the ability to shift the front clearance. The reason for that is was given to us by one of our contractors. So they were saying that you need to maintain that width of clearance, but what happens if you're tucked into the corner here? So I can shift that front clearance left or right to maintain the requirement without losing it into the wall. So yes, you can see all those. They show up in plan views as well. I don't have them turned on here. And they're great for coordination, right? So if you export this out to something like Navisworks, you'll start to see collisions. Even if it's not hitting the equipment, you want to know that there's no pipe running above that panel or whatever. And like you saw a minute ago, you can just turn them on or turn them off as you want to see them or not. So very simple and easy to use.
Jeremy also asked if there would be a recording of the webinar. The answer is yes. Probably late next week, we will have this recorded webinar up on the website, along with links to a second webinar that EasyPower has done showing data transfer back and forth for the analysis portion of the system. Next question says, Layout Fast contains meter center elbow and all the accessories for meter center equipment. I guess that's a question.
Yes, so let's go back here. Like I said at the beginning, what you see is what you get. So now, we've got the meter center and then the meter center mains and the meter center branches. So how you need to put that all together, we're giving you the equipment. The connectivity of it is we don't do conduit, we don't do those kind of things. If there are accessories that go with this stuff to make the connections, at this time we don't have that in place as far as modeling it. But I will tell you that there are, right now we're looking at products only. If we want to look at products and components, now you start to see things like, circuit breakers and fittings and connection points and There's a whole lot more here, but none of this stuff is really of any use to you yet, other than if you really wanted to throw a model of the, you know, of these kind of components in there, like this lock off guard kit, which I don't see that happening. So a lot of these accessory type stuff are just there to be included in the data, if you will.
So Jennifer's question.
So at some point, sorry, just because I want to make sure I answer the question. At some point, we may have it to where you can build that holistic system where you're putting in the mains and the branches and then all the connected parts that would go with it. Sorry.
It's all right. Jennifer asked, is there a way to select or reduce the parameters brought in from the data in Layout Fast? For example, not bringing in the materials and just have all materials by default or by category?
No. Well, I say no in the sense that one thing that we've done, if you look, for example, if you look at this transformer and you look at how many parameters are really there, it seems like a lot, but that's in this other category though, that's nothing that you would ever provide input to. So we've kept these pretty lightweight. We don't add a whole lot to that. You can always go in and change them, and it sounds like the question is, I don't want to go in and have to change it every time, but that goes back to, first of all, my first point, the reason we have so few parameters and keep this so lightweight is because we have instant access to the data right there. And all of this data that, I mean, can you imagine if every one of these line items was a parameter, just so that we could say, you have all the data? I mean, that would be ridiculous. So we keep them lightweight that way, but we do, you know, that those materials are what we make the model out of or make the actual transformer out of. So we're gonna provide that data. Now, what you could do is, just like we did, or I showed with the other item, is you could edit the family and then go in to its properties, set the materials all to defaults, save it. Now, every time you use Layout Fast, it's gonna use that base model and it's gonna not have those materials.
Time for one last question. Can a substation drawing be imported from, say, AutoCAD into the Revit for further design?
Yes, so one of the things about Revit is you can bring AutoCAD drawings, whether they're 3-dimensional or 2-dimensional, into Revit and you can see them visually. So you could do a combination of, let's say you did all your conduit modeling in AutoCAD, or AutoCAD MEP, or the fabrication software, whatever. If it's a DWG format, you could link it in here and you can have your Revit models of your equipment and all your AutoCAD. So long-winded answer, yes, you could do that.
Don, thank you very much.
I don't have any of that right here.
I think we did a good job. Thank you very much for the presentation. And just to reiterate, anyone that's registered for this webinar will receive a link to the video when it's posted on the website, and also a link to the webinar that we did specifically describing the EasyPower import and export capabilities into Revit. So thank you all for attending. I hope you have a good day.
Hey, one last thing, Jim.
Sure.
So this is where you can download the Revit plugin, or you can get it through the Autodesk App Store. If you want to just access Layout Fast on the web, there's the web address. And if you have any problems, issues, feedback, whatever, you can contact me. It's best to email me. So there's that information. Thank you so much for your time. Appreciate the opportunity to share this with you today.
So long.